What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Fantasy Football 201. We're back in our original studio today. We are going to talk Week 15 waiver wire pickups. We're going to go through pickups, drops, and holds, recap Week 14, and preview the Fantasy Football playoffs here with our Week 15 waiver show. So for this week, what we're going to do is today's going to be a little bit shorter than our typical waiver videos. And then later this week, I'm going to go through a playoff preview where I'm going to be focusing on what matchups will be the best to play, how I rank the players heading into the playoffs. That'll probably be coming out on Thursday, so please keep an eye out for that. But for this particular week, for this particular video, what we're going to do is focus on the waivers. We're going to talk pickups, drops, and holds for each position, as I mentioned earlier, and we will continue again with our live videos as well. So if you have any questions for that, please stay tuned for Sunday at what would that be? It would be, I switched time zones, so I'm trying to think. So it would be 11:30 Eastern time. So if you come in, if you want to tune into that, I will be tuning in an hour and a half before the games start. So please keep an eye out for that. And as always, please subscribe to the channel if you want to have your questions answered. I reply to all my commenters, so please like, comment, and subscribe, and take advantage with this small channel to have your questions asked to help you win a championship for those of you who are in the playoffs this season. All right, so heading into Week 15, we have come off the bye weeks, so no more bye weeks, no more in sync bye segment. So we will be going through the quarterbacks first. We'll talk the guys that you should be picking up. And I'm going to give a little bit of a preview of how I rank the top 10 for each of these positions as well. So not going to spoil everything. We'll have more of that coming out in the video later this week. But I do want to have that discussion with some of these players in terms of how you're going to hold certain guys through the playoffs. So without further ado, we'll go to the quarterbacks. So Week 15, there are a couple of good streaming options for this week that you could look at. But first of all, check to see if these players are out there on waivers, because I think they could be valuable assets for you. First, Brock Purdy gets the Los Angeles Rams. Check to see if he is available, because Purdy had struggled of late and then he was injured. But when he's been healthy, and especially when he is in a warm weather environment, which he's projected to be the rest of the season, they get the Rams this week, he's been effective. So the Rams just gave up a huge game to Josh Allen. So if Brock Purdy is out there, I think he's a great play for this week. Check to see if Justin Herbert is available against Tampa Bay. He's another guy that's been struggling lately, but I rank Herbert within my top 12. So in terms of the fantasy football playoffs. So I would play him this week against Tampa Bay. If he's out there, somebody rage dropped him, I would pick him up. And then Tua Tagovailoa. So Tua has actually been the number one quarterback over the last 4 games. So if he is out there, he would again be another great play for this week. And the thing with him is, they get Houston, which is a defense that is pretty good, but they struggle against the pass. So this could be an opportunity for Tua to potentially have another good game here today. And I like his schedule as well moving forward into the playoffs. He's got San Francisco, which is a kind of a tough matchup, but then he gets Cleveland, which is definitely a beatable pass defense. So all that being said, these are some of the best stream options that are available for Week 15. And then I'll talk a little bit of Week 16 as well for the quarterback position, because in those of you that have a first-round bye, you may be trying to play this based on your Week 16 matchup. So please keep an eye out for the players that are available then as well. So the first player I want to talk about is Bryce Young. So Bryce Young has been playing a lot better as of late. He started off poorly this season, got benched, but he put up pretty respectable numbers against the Philadelphia Eagles, which is a tough defense to face. So Bryce Young, over the last couple games, I'm talking specifically since the Giants game in Week 10. So he had Week 10 against the Giants, and then Week 11 bye. Then he played Kansas City, Tampa Bay, and Philadelphia. So he has a 4 touchdowns to 1 interception ratio. He kind of struggled against the Giants in terms of his yardage. He had 126 yards, but since that game, he's had at least 190 yards in each of the last 3. And in those 4 games, he's also scored at least 12 fantasy points. So if you're looking specifically at 2 quarterback leagues, all that is promising as it is. But then you look at the schedule for the playoffs, and he's got a pretty nice schedule moving forward. He gets the Dallas Cowboys, which was pretty much eviscerated last night by the Bengals pass offense. Then he gets Arizona, which is a good defense, but not anything, necessarily super intimidating. And then he gets Tampa Bay, which is a defense that he scored 23.6 points against in week 13. And he gets them in week 17 during that fantasy football championship run. So this is a good piece to have. I don't really like him as a start necessarily for this week in terms of guys that I would put in my top 12. But that said, if you're in the deep quarterback leagues, if you're in the 2 quarterback leagues, I think there's a real chance that Bryce Young has a good game against Dallas in week 15. And then he gets another good matchup in that fantasy championship game. So Bryce Young, in terms of the upside, he would be my number 1 pickup in terms of guys that you're trying to pick up and see if you could hold him through the fantasy playoffs to help you in the stretch run. My number 2 pickup, and this is another player that I've routinely in the show hated, and it is Aaron Rodgers. So Aaron Rodgers, yes, he's been a shell of himself this season, and I've pretty much recommended to drop him the entire season. But I think this is actually a good week that you could pick him up and play him because he gets Jacksonville. And Jacksonville has been, in terms of their performance, they have been the 31st ranked team against quarterbacks, which means that for quarterbacks, they're the second best matchup. Aaron Rodgers, although he has struggled this season, he put up pretty respectable numbers against Miami. He had 339 yards and a touchdown. No interceptions, so that equated to 17.5 fantasy points. He gets Jacksonville week 15, and then in week 16, he gets kind of a nice matchup as well against the Los Angeles Rams. So in this particular game against Jacksonville, warm weather, don't have to worry about the elements. He seems to be getting more in sync with his receivers over this past week. This team is not going anywhere, but all that said, Aaron Rodgers is playing for his career right now. He's trying to convince teams that he could at least is worthy of a starting job next season, which is very much in question. So I would not be surprised if this is a game where Aaron Rodgers balls out, and he's somebody that you could stream for this week. I don't really like him as a long-term option outside of that, but if you're just looking for a 1-week quarterback replacement, if you have a quarterback who has a tough matchup for this particular week, I think that I was looking at the screen and Russell Wilson was the next name that popped up, but Aaron Rodgers would be a great play for this week, and I think he's one of the best streaming options for week 15. Other good streaming options as well. Jameis Winston gets Kansas City. I think this is a game that the Cleveland Browns are going to be needing to throw quite often, and Jameis Winston would be a good streaming quarterback to play for this particular week. He has his up and down performances, not anything necessarily great for this week, but Jameis Winston is another good player to have for the week 16 bye because he gets the Cincinnati Bengals, which has been giving up points to opposing defenses like candy. So because of that, I think if Jameis Winston, if you want to use him as a streaming option for these first 2 weeks of the playoffs, you can get away with it. Kansas City, it's not an amazing matchup, but I think particularly week 16, Jameis could be of a lot of value, and he's somebody that I would be definitely trying to pick up as well. Especially for those teams on a week 16 bye, this would be my number 1 pickup among your available waiver options. And then also consider Cooper Rush, who has Carolina for this upcoming game, which is another defense that is very beatable. Cooper Rush was okay against Cincinnati. Started off hot and then kind of faded a little bit. So he had 13.8 fantasy points, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, and 183 yards. You would have liked a little bit more against Cincinnati, but against Carolina, he's shown some respectable numbers this season that I think he could be a usable start against Carolina if in a pinch. Particularly Houston and Washington, he had 16 and 17 fantasy points respectively. So Cooper Rush could be a solid play for Week 15 as well. And then he gets Tampa Bay the following week, so he's another player kind of like Jameis where he has good matchups for multiple weeks in a row. And then in Week 16, if you're desperate, you could consider the Giants quarterback, whoever that would be against Atlanta, who just got just totally torched by Sam Darnold. But I think in general, I just want to talk about these 4 teams as teams that I would try to avoid their starting quarterback because they're down to second, third string caliber quarterbacks, and I think it's going to be a mess in terms of their fantasy value moving forward. And that is the New York Giants, the Las Vegas Raiders, the Jacksonville Jaguars, and the New Orleans Saints. So New Orleans is now going to be turning to Jake Haener. The Giants are, as of now, Drew Lock, but he didn't really inspire confidence that he would be continuing to start if Tommy DeVito gets healthy. You've got Desmond Ridder now likely to start for Vegas, although thankfully Aiden O'Connell avoided a serious injury. And then Mac Jones is practically a third-string quarterback in terms of how he plays. So I would just be avoiding these 4 teams, quarterbacks in general. I'm not going to be recommending them as streamers. Who can you drop among the quarterback? So Derek Carr is pretty easy because he's out for the season. Kirk Cousins has nice playoff matchups. And that's something that's disappointing about both these players is that early in the season, you looked at these matchups and they looked pretty good for them. But now they're both either injured or struggling and are kind of off the table. Harder matchups, though, or harder quarterbacks to drop based on matchups and other things. Geno Smith would be a drop for me. Geno has not really been putting up great numbers. This team has really kind of found its identity in the defense and the run game. So, and Geno has the 21st ranked strength of schedule remaining rest of season. So, not anything that really is spectacular for him either. So, all of that being said, Geno Smith would be a drop for me. Caleb Williams is another difficult decision, but he would be a considerable drop for me as well. Kind of regressed last week, as I was expecting. When they change coordinators and head coaches multiple times in the season with the rookie quarterback, it just makes it very challenging to consistently be productive. So it probably would have made sense if they just kept Eberflus and see what they had with the offense with Thomas Brown. But they get Minnesota, Detroit, and Seattle the next 3 weeks, which are all pretty tough matchups. And I think Caleb Williams is droppable based on that slate of games. Jared Goff is also a drop candidate as well, more so in one quarterback leagues that are not super deep. But he gets the 32nd ranked strength of schedule for quarterbacks in the playoffs: Buffalo, Chicago, and San Francisco. And 2 of them are at home, so you like that. But I think that Jared Goff has kind of regressed from some of the real eye-popping numbers that he had in October. And then CJ Stroud coming off of his bye. I don't know if I could recommend picking him up if he was dropped. And I think if you have him, I mean, what convinces you that things are going to change with him? Because he's had some good matchups this season, most particularly week 13 before they went on a bye, and he didn't take advantage of it. So to me, CJ Stroud is kind of somebody he's just a bust this season in fantasy. Not saying he's a real quarterback bust, but I think for this particular season, I would be trying to not associate myself with him in terms of redraft leagues in the playoffs. Don't put yourself in a position to trust him and then get burned, because we haven't had really elite numbers from him since week 2. Who do you hold? If you have Jameis Winston, I would hold him even if you're not going to start him week 15, because he does get Cincinnati in week 16, as I already mentioned. Anthony Richardson, I would be holding as well. I don't rank him in my top 15, but I do think that he has a lot of value in terms of his ability to run the ball, and he could be a real dark horse. So I wouldn't put a talent like that on the waivers. If anything, I'd make sure he's benched so that way nobody else has him. and he goes off. But I would not be trying to drop him. And then consider Will Levis, if he's healthy, to not drop him this week because he plays Cincinnati. And I think that if Will Levis comes back healthy, despite how he played against Jacksonville, he could be a good stream this week. Kind of unfortunate that he got injured in that game, and in general, the team just kind of didn't show up. But my top 10 at quarterback, and I'll talk this a little bit more in depth and go into my top 20 in the next video, but number 1, I still have Jalen Hurts, and then I have Josh Allen. So I still feel that Hurts as a whole is going to run the ball more than Allen. But as I mentioned earlier, Josh Allen with his rushing ability puts him up in the top 2. And then number 3 is Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson has the hardest strength of schedule of those 3 relatively. But I think those 3 are pretty much an elite tier of their own. Then you have the next tier of elite players, Joe Burrow, number 4, and Jaden Daniels, number 5. I think that those guys are not quite at the level of Hurts, Allen, and Lamar Jackson, but they are great fantasy football assets to have, and they have pretty nice strength of schedules too, at least for Jaden Daniels. Then it's a little bit of a drop off. I would go number 6, Baker Mayfield. Number 7, I'd go Kyler Murray because of his rushing upside. And this was a very close between him and the next player. And number 8 would be Sam Darnold. So Sam Darnold, looking great. Love what he did this past week. And Jordan Love is number 9 for me, and then Bo Nix number 10. So that's how I round out my top 10 for the fantasy playoff schedule, but I will go into that more on Thursday. We move to the running back position. So first of all, check to see if Zach Charbonnet is out there. The handcuffs are the most important thing that you want to make sure that you have for this week, and that's going to be the running theme, as it's been multiple weeks that I've been doing this show. But Zach Charbonnet may still be out there, and I think there's a good chance that he actually overtakes Ken Walker as the starting running back based on how this past game went. So I would divide this first into the other handcuffs and then into the players that I like as potential breakouts that could take over their backfield and be usable assets that aren't necessarily a handcuff. It kind of depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking more for insurance of your running backs that you've already had take you to the playoffs this season, then you want to get handcuffs for this week at running back. But there are some flyers that you could take a look out for that could be effective. So the handcuffs, there's been a change in some of our priorities of some guys that you want to handcuff now. So Isaac Guerendo is now the starting running back in San Francisco, and he's dealing with a foot injury. So Patrick Taylor would be the number 1 pickup among those handcuffs should Guerendo not go. It's just absolutely crazy to me. Like, San Francisco's on technically their 4th running back because Elijah Mitchell was supposed to be the backup. He never played this season. Now they could be going to their 5th running back if Guerendo can't go. So San Francisco, unfortunately, has just been plagued with injuries this season. Braylon Allen, if Breece Hall is not good to go, Isaiah Davis is a potential handcuff option for him as well. Aaron Jones, you want to use Cam Akers. I think that Aaron Jones has put himself in the category to have a handcuff, and he gets a good matchup this week against Chicago. James Cook, you may want to look at Ty Johnson as the handcuff now because Davis did not get any carries against Buffalo, and Ty Johnson was actually pretty involved as a pass-catching running back, so that's something to consider. Bucky Irving, if he's not good to go, Sean Tucker would be a good 3rd-string handcuff because the Buccaneers have consistently used 2 running backs throughout the season, and if Bucky Irving can't go, I think that Tucker has streaming appeal. And then for Alvin Kamara, Kendre Miller would be the new handcuff for them as well. Miller has been injured most of the season, but he's getting back healthy, and he got into the end zone this past week. So these are some names, deep names to keep an eye out for. If you're looking for one of those who could potentially play this week, it would be Patrick Taylor. So monitor that information with Guerendo, and I would make sure that Taylor is rostered in case anything happens to Isaac Guerendo. The other running backs that you want to look at that could potentially be sleepers down the stretch, number 1 for me is Tank Bigsby. So I'll talk about his backfield mate in just a minute, but Tank Bigsby had 18 carries this past week. Jacksonville is a mess, and their running backs have not had a ton of upside in recent weeks, but Bigsby has been the better running back on the course of the season, and now he had 18 carries to Travis Etienne's 4 this past week. He got a touchdown, 55 yards. He gets the Jets this next week, that's a pretty good matchup, but then he gets Las Vegas in week 16. So if you're looking for a potential sleeper, it could be Tank Bigsby. I know that Jacksonville you're relying on a lot. They have Mac Jones as their quarterback. It's not great, but Tank Bigsby to me has stepped up as somebody that you want to put on your bench and keep an eye on to see what happens. Because if we see more, 18 carries versus Etienne's 4 moving forward, and they are going into that week 16 matchup against Las Vegas, this could be a real running back sleeper for you. So for those first round bye teams, I'd be picking up Bigsby and seeing what happens while you're on bye to potentially see if he's a candidate to play the following week. Sincere McCormick, we've talked about already. He is kind of similar to Tank Bigsby. He again had 15 carries, 78 yards. He got 2 catches as well. This is somebody I think that is going to probably take over the Raiders' backfield, and I'd be trying to put my focus into him as somebody that you want to see how this situation develops. They get good matchups as well. They get Jacksonville week 16. They get New Orleans week 17. So these are some good matchups for them as well. And then they get Atlanta, which, that's a pretty good run defense. But I think he's probably going to be the running back that the Raiders are going to focus on moving forward in their development. Other names that are, so those 2 names I think are the biggest ones. These ones are more like deeper league considerations. Jerome Ford is really kind of a desperation play, but he's kind of a light version of a Jaylen Warren where, you're relying on him as a pass-catching running back who could steal opportunity. And they get Kansas. Excuse me. I bring this up because they get Kansas City next week, and I think there's a good chance that they pivot to Ford because they're going to have a hard time running the ball with Chubb. But I don't expect Ford to put up elite numbers by any means. Tajay Spears is another guy that could be getting some more opportunity as well. As this team is fading into the offseason, they may want to see what they have in Spears. Drop candidates. Devin Singletary, to me, is a drop. Limited upside, and this is Tyrone Tracy's backfield. Alexander Mattison has been out a couple weeks, but even if he comes back, I don't think it's worth putting him back in the roster because, as I've already said, I think they're going to see what they have in McCormick and let Mattison go to the bench. So now we get into a little bit harder decisions. Ray Davis is the handcuff to James Cook. I'm not really sure if he is going to be the handcuff with how Ty Johnson has been playing. So if you have James Cook, Ray Davis has had good games. You may be able to rely on him, but also we're not really sure if he's going to get the full workload should anything happen to Cook. So he may be somebody you can move on from. Kareem Hunt as well. This backfield carry split has trended towards Isaiah Pacheco again. And Kareem Hunt now is really the handcuff to Pacheco. So if you've been relying on Hunt for that stretch where he was the starter, you probably need to try to move on and either get your own handcuffed or a position that could help you more in the playoffs. And then this player, Travis Etienne. I have moved on from the position of trying to hold him, trying to see what happens, because he's been terrible. And I don't see this changing. He had 4 carries this week. He did have 4 catches, so that was kind of, that kind of, I guess, saved his day a little bit. But, we have not seen numbers from him that have been good really the entire season. The most amount of full fantasy points that he's had in terms of PPR is 14. That was all the way back in week 2. Yeah, he gets some better matchups this week. So, if you want to put him on your bench, you could see what happens against the Jets. But to me, I don't see this formula changing. And what's going to happen is that, if he plays respectably well, you're going to be tempted to put him into your lineup. And I would just not go there with him. He's now, to me, he's just somebody I don't want to deal with the rest of the season. I would hold Gus Edwards. He struggled with his efficiency, but he is the number 1 running back there. And they get some okay matchups coming up. over the next few weeks. They get Tampa Bay week 15, then they get New England week 17. So Edwards, despite kind of being pedestrian, I would hold on to him. I think he could have a better game in week 15. Jaylen Warren as well, I'd be holding on to. He's kind of like a handcuff that you could still play if you're in a pinch. He's over the last 5 games, he's had at least 9 points, which is his typical profile. And especially, they have some tough running back matchups: Philadelphia, Baltimore, Kansas City these next 3 weeks. So I think this could actually play better in terms of Jaylen Warren's favor to be used as a pass catching running back, especially if Pickens is out. And then Nick Chubb, I hold on to as well. I think that, again, Cincinnati week 16 could be of value there. And then DeAndre Swift, another guy I would be holding on to because this is still his backfield. Roschon Johnson's dealing with injuries, and I think that you don't want to drop somebody who's consistently the RB1 on a team who's had some good performances this season. All right, so my running back top 10 is still in flex, but I just want to say, Chase Brown, man, this guy to me is arguably a top 5 running back rest of season. That game yesterday against Dallas, they use him almost like a McCaffrey, where he gets so many targets, he gets almost all the carries. I mean, Chase Brown has been a huge sleeper for those of you who invested in him this season, and he was somebody that I was really beating the drum for to pick up quite a while ago. But top 3 for me is Saquon, Henry, Bijan Robinson. Then I would go Etienne 4, and then I'm thinking Chase Brown 5. That's really how highly I'm viewing him right now. I would then go after that. I still like the Jets running backs because of the schedule, so I would put them number 6. If it's Breece Hall, yes, but if it's Allen, then I would go there. Then Gibbs, Kyron Williams, Connor, and David Montgomery round out my top. Josh Jacobs an honorable mention, but he's very touchdown dependent. So I'm still working on this in terms of how I'm going to rank all of the running backs, because I'm going to include it in a top 25 for you guys for the playoffs and talk some sleepers as well. But Chase Brown, I just want to bring him up because he's been excellent. Wide receivers. Check to see if the Bears wide receivers are out there. They have the number 2 strength of schedule. I like Odunze the most for terms of upside, but in terms of consistency of play, I would go with DJ Moore. And then check if Jacoby Myers is out there for whatever reason. Quarterback play is going to be a concern, but they have the number 1 strength of schedule, and Myers is targeted pretty frequently as a receiver. I think he would be an effective flex play in the playoffs with that schedule. So those guys are the top priorities. Other good pickups for this week, though. Adam Thielen. I think of all the receivers that are lightly rostered and available, Thielen would be number 1 for me. So I've been hoping Leggett would have taken this opportunity, but it's really been back to Adam Thielen, who's been the one who's had rapport with Bryce Young. The last 2 weeks, 10 targets, 11 targets. Tampa Bay, he had 8 for 99 and a touchdown. Philadelphia, he had 9 for 102, no touchdowns, but in both games, 23 and 19 fantasy PPR points. And as I mentioned with Bryce Young, they get Dallas in week 15 and Tampa Bay in week 17, which is a pretty good stretch. Adam Thielen, if he is out there, is somebody that you can play for this week. I love him this week against Dallas as my number 1 wide receiver to pick up. Christian Watson as well is a good pickup as 2. He's emerged as the most reliable receiver right now of the Packers. Reliable is a relative term. But I think that if you want to take a shot on any of them, of the guys that are lightly available, Christian Watson would be the one to do it. They get Seattle this week, kind of a tough matchup, but then they get New Orleans and Minnesota, which are better matchups to close the fantasy football playoffs. So Christian Watson would be number 2. Jalen McMillan finally steps up and does something. He got a touchdown this week. Actually, did he get 2 touchdowns? Let me double check this. Yeah, he got 2 touchdowns, 4 for 59 and 2. So, I don't love that in terms of not insane volume, but he did get 7 targets, and this team does need another receiver outside of Mike Evans Evans does not seem fully healthy too. That's another thing to continue to monitor. Tough matchup this week with the Chargers for Jalen McMillan, but then he gets Dallas and Carolina week 16 and 17. So more of a play for the week 16, 17, but he's somebody that should be picked up and continue to monitor to see how this develops moving forward. The next on this list for me would be the Pittsburgh receivers. So neither of them really did too much this week with Pickens being out. A little bit disappointing. I'm talking Calvin Austin and Mike Williams. Williams is more of the downfield threat who I think could actually replicate Pickens' role, but Austin is more of a slot gadget player who could be used in the short yardage situations. So who do you choose? I would personally go with the upside of Austin if you had to go with one or the other should Pickens continue to miss time. But Mike Williams is a interesting option to consider as well. So Thielen 1, Watson 2, and I think after Thielen to Watson there's kind of a drop off, and then then there's Watson McMillan, and then after McMillan there's a pretty big drop off as well. But some other names I want to bring up who may be out there due to injury situations and could be beneficial. If Ladd McConkey continues to miss time, I think you could look at Josh Palmer as a pickup. And kind of same applies to Quentin Johnson should he be available as well. But Josh Palmer, interesting name to keep an eye out for. This week was one of his better performances of the season. He had 13.8 fantasy points. He had a total of 6 for 78 on 9 targets. So with 9 targets, you really like that. And if McConkey is going to be injured for quite some time, they get Tampa Bay this next week. Palmer could be moved into the streaming category. So he's somebody that is an early candidate for my under 40% roster to potentially be a start for week 15. And then Cedric Tillman, been dealing with the concussion and has not played as of late. But Cleveland, these wide receivers are really a gold mine for opportunity because of Jameis Winston's ability to get the ball down the field. Cedric Tillman may be out there on waivers, and I think he's a good pickup that could be streamable depending on the matchup with Kansas City this upcoming week. Drop candidates. So Marquez Valdes-Scantling to me is a drop. He's gotten by off his touchdown volume, so you want to continue to play that game, by all means, you probably can continue to do that. But now with Jake Haener as the quarterback versus Derek Carr, I'm very concerned about his ability to be effective. He's dependent on big play balls thrown down the field, and I'm having a hard time seeing Jake Haener being able to do that. They get Washington. Green Bay is a tough matchup, and then they get Vegas in week 17. So the matchups are there. Not Green Bay, but for Washington and Vegas. The opportunity is there, but with the quarterback, I just don't think he's somebody that I would continue to roster right now. Parker Washington, disappointed. He is a drop. Xavier Legette, to me, is a drop as well. He got 8 targets, but he dropped a pass that could have won them the game against Philadelphia. Legette, I think, is very interesting in terms of his dynasty value, but it just does not seem like he's really ready to take the opportunity this season. And I've kind of pivoted now to this is Adam Thielen's wide receiver core, and Xavier Legette is more of the second, third option who could go off, but a little less reliable. Wan'Dale Robinson is a drop. He was only really had upside as long as the quarterback play was fine, and right now it's not. And then Deebo Samuel, to me, this is much like the Travis Etienne situation where I just don't think I can trust him anymore, and I would be trying to move on from him. He's played so bad as of late that I don't think there's really a situation where you can put him back in your lineup, and I would just not be wanting to tempt myself into doing that. This wide receiver core is about Juwan Jennings right now, and that's pretty much it. Deebo, to me, I would let that be somebody else's problems and drop him heading into the playoffs. Hold Nick Westbrook-Ikhine struggled this week, but he did almost have a touchdown again. and they get Cincinnati. So I think this could be a good game for Westbrook-Ikhine despite a down week. Keenan Allen, I would continue to hold as well. Disappointed despite some better games as of late. But I think that he will be more productive. And again, that number one strength of schedule that I talked, or number two strength of schedule for the Bears, I would be happy to have Keenan Allen in the playoffs. These two players were highly thought of, have kind of been up and down, especially Jaden Reed has been down. But Marvin Harrison Jr., the other player, I would be holding them. I think they will be okay for the playoffs. And Green Bay actually has a top 10 strength of schedule for the wide receivers. So Jaden Reed could be in play to start again despite having a 0. He gets Seattle. I don't really know if I would play Jaden Reed in that game, but then later on when they get Minnesota week 17, that is potentially a gold mine game for Jaden Reed. So I would not be dropping him. I'd just be leaving him on the bench for now. Marvin Harrison, a little bit, just another like up and down game for him again. He gets New England this next week, which I think should be better, but he's kind of moved into more of that flex tier of receivers at this time. Top 10. So I pivoted again with that game yesterday. And I had Justin Jefferson still at number 1, but Jamar Chase is he's the amount of volume that he gets with Joe Burrow just makes him number 1. That is Justin Jefferson. St. Brown, JSN has moved up into the top 5, and then Nico Collins. So I'm going to give you my top 5 for that, continue to work this list. But I think that I want to bring up JSN is that this guy is already a top 5 receiver, and he gets an excellent strength of schedule. So this is a player that if you have him, I would be thrilled moving forward with him as a must-start player. Tight ends. So check if Jonnu Smith is there. That is the best option that could still be out there on waivers. And to me, he is a top 10 tight end rest of season. So I would make sure that Jonnu Smith is rostered if he happens to still be out there. There's not a great week for tight ends, but the number 1 I would be looking at is Juwan Johnson. Again, quarterback issues in New Orleans makes this a questionable start. But at the same time, I do think that Juwan Johnson will be effective because he has the number 3 strength of schedule for tight ends. He also was heavily targeted in this past game and finished as the number 3 tight end on the week. So his matchups moving forward, we've got Washington, Green Bay, and Las Vegas. I think in the Washington game in particular, he could be a good play for this week. And then in Las Vegas especially. So Juwan Johnson is in that streaming tier where he could be a top 15 to me. There's not a lot of guys I would start him over, but if you're looking at somebody who could help you potentially, especially in week 17 against Vegas, Juwan Johnson could be the one to do that. The next would be Pat Freiermuth, who's playing a lot better as of late. He's had some good matchups, and he continues to have good matchups moving forward. And the Pickens injury means there could be more targets going his way. Touchdowns the past 2 games against Cincinnati and Cleveland. Then he gets Philadelphia, Baltimore, and then in week 17, he gets the tight end sieve, Kansas City, which is great for him in that fantasy playoff. So Pat Freiermuth, another great name who I think really could be of value to you later on. So I think if you have to go with the play for this week, I would prefer Juwan Johnson in their matchup against Washington. But if you're looking for more of that later play in week 17, I think that Freiermuth against Kansas City is about as good of a championship tight end stream as you could get. Other names to monitor: Grant Calcaterra finished this week as a top 10 tight end, and Goddard is on IR, so he could continue to get involved, but only 3 targets. I don't really necessarily love that, despite the fact that he did get a touchdown. And then we want to start having this discussion with Brock Bowers about handcuffing him with Michael Mayer, because Brock Bowers, for whatever reason, was not targeted as much as Mayer. I think that in itself is more of a fluke. I wouldn't be concerned about that as long as Bowers is playing. I think he's going to continue to get more targets. But I just say that because this team is not going anywhere. They're 2-11. They're trying to get the number 1 pick. So I think that there's a good chance that they may sit Bowers as we get into the later weeks of the playoffs. So if I own Bowers, I would make sure that that Michael Mayer is picked up and handcuffed to Bowers. I think you can make that same argument with Kelsey and Noah Gray, but I think other than those two, there's no real tight end handcuffs that really make any sense to me. But Mayer had 7 for 68 and 9 with Bowers. So I say that because if Bowers is to miss any time, Mayer could really be a huge sleeper. And you look at their schedule, Atlanta, Jacksonville, and New Orleans. Jacksonville and New Orleans, particularly weeks 16 and 17, are great matchups for the tight end. And if they decide that Bowers, they're just going to let him, recover for next year, this is a potentially great pickup. Will Disley is a drop, dealing with injury now. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to take advantage of the schedule. Kyle Pitts, I just don't want to talk about Kyle Pitts anymore because this guy is just a bust. Taken ahead of Jamar Chase, taken ahead of, I'd have to look specifically at the list of the people that he was taken ahead of, but it's just like really bad. Like there's no excuse for this guy going number 4 and putting up the production that he has since 2021. He just needs to be out of people's minds as a fantasy option. Cole Kmet is a drop. It continues to be up and down. And then I would recommend dropping Dalton Kincaid too. He has the number 31 strength of schedule. He's been injured. He's not exactly been a standout tight end anyway. And then this team has just become, you never really can predict who's going to get involved other than Khalil Shakir. So I would just personally move on from the Dalton Kincaid experience. I would hold Zach Ertz in this matchup against New Orleans. Ertz is getting a lot of volume, and I think against the Saints, he will be an effective play for you. And then I believe they get the Giants in week 17, which is a great matchup for him as well. So let me just double check that real quick for you. Moving over to Zach Ertz. Okay. So I'll confirm that. I believe in week 17, Washington is playing the Giants. But I would hold on to Zach Ertz because I think that he's a big part of this offense. He's consistently involved, and I think that he's a pretty solid tight end moving forward. That gives you a lot of streaming value. So they actually play Atlanta, which is actually maybe an even better matchup than the Giants. But yeah, hold Zach Ertz. Evan Ingram, I would still hold as well. He's not been great, but he is getting targeted pretty often by the Jags, and I think gives you a consistent floor around that tight end 12 to 15 range. And then TJ Hawkinson, I would not drop either. He's been a little bit down as of late, but Darnold is hot. They have some decent matchups moving forward where I expect there to be a lot of points, and I think Sam Darnold will get Hawkinson involved too. There'll be some regression to him getting the amount of points that we saw Jefferson and Addison get this past week. Real quick, so there's a pretty clear top 10 a top 5 at tight end, and then it drops off from there. Number 1 is Bowers, 2 Kittle, 3 McBride, 4 Kelsey, and then 5 Njoku. So I bring up Njoku, who has a top 3 schedule remaining at the tight end position. I think Njoku is going to be an excellent play with Jameis Winston, as I predicted earlier this season. After that, there's a little bit more debate. You kind of get the Hawkinson, Andrews, Laporta conversation with those guys. You get Jonnu Smith in there, maybe Pat Freiermuth. So I will give you more of that on Thursday, but I do want to make the clear delineation of the top 5 to me, which is Bowers, Kittle, McBride, Kelsey, and Njoku. Defenses. So check if the Baltimore Ravens are out there. They're playing the New York Giants this week, who are either going to play Tommy DeVito or Drew Lock, which is going to be a gold mine for you. That's my top defensive pickup for the week. Kansas City plays Cleveland. You always have pick 6 potential. Kansas City's defense has not really been as consistent as of late, though, so that's a little bit more concerning to me. Washington gets New Orleans, so that's another good matchup against Jake Haener. And then if you're looking more at the longer-term plays to week 16, a defense that you could play both this week and the following week, Arizona gets New England, and then they get Carolina. And then Atlanta, which it's hard to recommend Atlanta after how they played this past week, but they get the Vegas Raiders. then they get the New York Giants. So keep an eye out for that as well. But the number one defense I want to mention, who I think there's a good chance that they get dropped, and as I already said in my earlier video, it's a championship level defense that could win you the championship this season. The Buffalo Bills, I think, could get dropped this week. They had -4 points against the Rams this week, which, that's disappointing. And then they get Detroit in week 15. So I think a lot of people are going to be dropping that defense. But do not do that, and if they are dropped, make sure that you pick them up and spend pretty good fab to get them, because in weeks 16 and 17, they get the New York Jets and then the they get the New England Patriots, then the Jets, and then if you're playing week 18, they get the New England Patriots. So that is the defense to pick up, but you're probably not going to be getting them necessarily in on waiver day, but check to see if they are dropped and make sure they're picked up before the end of the week. Other good week 16 streams for those of you that have the bye. Green Bay gets New Orleans. Green Bay is a good defense already, and New Orleans is looking like they're going to be a rough offense rest of the season. Arizona, as I already mentioned, against Carolina. Tampa Bay gets Dallas. And Tampa Bay is another one of those where they have a tough matchup facing the Chargers in week 15, but then you look at how they're projected to do after that. They have some pretty good matchups against Dallas and then Carolina, and then New Orleans in week 18. So that's a good defense as well for the week 18 streams too. And then, as I already mentioned, Atlanta plays the Giants. I'm not as big on Atlanta though, but they are juicy matchups for them. So kickers, I want to mention Jason Sanders. Over the last 7 games, he's had at least 9 points in 6 of them. Playing better as of late with Tua, and he's jumped into the top 10. So if he's out there, he would be my pickup and play for this week. Another good option is Katie Ork of Cincinnati, who has replaced Evan McPherson on IR. Cincinnati this week gets... Let me check who they get real quick. They get the Tennessee Titans, pretty good matchup for them as well. And then with the kickers, keep an eye out for the kickers on bye, because you could be picking them up. Kaimi Fairbairn would be the best one to get. You also have Younghoe Koo and Will Lutz as kickers that you could pick up coming off their bye. And also keep an eye out for Harrison Butker, who's going to be coming off of his injury and is projected to potentially return week 15. So if he comes back, he's somebody that you can pick up and put in your lineup right away as a starting kicker. That's all we've got for this video. Stay tuned for the video coming later this week, which will talk pickups and playoff streaming options that you want to look at for week 15. I'm going to rank the players, talk the sleepers that you could still get to plug into your lineup, and how I would project that you pick up and play your players for week 15 to prepare you for this first round of the playoffs. So drop a comment if you have any, and stay tuned for the videos later this week and the live video coming out on Sunday. So hope you guys have a great week, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.